Greetings YouTube. Today I'm going to review a role-playing game product, Interface Zero. Now this particular edition of Interface Zero is for the Modern 20 rule set. Now I don't actually own the Modern 20 rule set, and I'm not 100% sure how it differs from the core D20 mechanic, I'll be honest. I believe it's derived somewhat from the D20 Modern, hence the name. But they comment in the text itself that you can use true 20 products pretty much on a one-to-one basis without any translation issues. And I actually have access to true 20. I just haven't read it, and I'm going to be reading that in the near future. So hopefully I will have a better understanding of some of the mechanics that are in this product that at the moment may have, escaped me. So I'm not really going to be talking a whole lot about the mechanics in this review, but pretty much just the setting itself. But if you're familiar with the D20 setting at all, and D20 Modern in specific, you should be able to have a grasp of this at least. Now I know that there is I want to say Savage World version of this that just recently came out. I know they just re-released a new version of this in a different rule system, so you may be able to find that much more easily than this version. Alrighty, what the players will find within. Okay, the player section, first we have the Time of Revelations, which deals with a timeline which takes us up to the point that the game takes place in the year 2088. Now, I love a good timeline, and this right here is a top-notch timeline. Not only is the timeline itself compelling and well written, but there are numerous sidebars which describe details that are too large to discuss in the timeline itself. Because the timeline is really nothing but a bunch of bullet points. The longest thing you're going to have in a timeline is maybe 2 paragraphs or something like that. You don't want a lot of density in your timeline. You want to be able to get people jump from point to point to get a really good overview of the world at large. And they've broken their timeline into discrete time periods so that it works a little better, like from 2011 to I think it was 2029 or something like that. This is what happens in that era, in the next era, things like that. Ones that made sense within the context of the timeline itself, events that changed the world politically and things like that. Now the setting itself is, of course, it's cyberpunk, but it covers a number of different genres. It touches a little bit on the post-apocalyptic. You could do a post-cyberpunk world. It's a lot of transhuman elements to this setting. People who are now moving to the point where the definition of human is now in question. What is it to be human? There are digital people. There are cybernetic people. There are people who have genetically engineered themselves to not look like people. So you have a number of different, if you will, species in the world, all derived from humans. You also have completely digital constructs, programs that have been emancipated and given civil rights. You have people that are, completely synthetic from birth. They were designed as laborers. They are the world's replicants, if you will, if I were to borrow a term from Blade Runner and do electric dreams. Do electric sheep? The sheep have the robots dream of electric sheep. Sorry. So you have a number of different areas that you can explore in this post-apocalyptic / cyberpunk / post-cyberpunk / transhumanist world. Now the most minor of these story elements is the post-apocalyptic elements, but the world has suffered a limited nuclear war, and there are areas which have been abandoned because of this, and they have a very post-apocalyptic feel because there are survivors there, and yet there are survivors living under conditions that anyone looking at them, not knowing the world around them, would see it as a post-apocalyptic setting. The world is different, but it's also the same. The poor are poor, the rich are rich. The disparity between the two groups has grown even worse than it is now, even though technically there are parts of the world that are in a post-scarcity economy. Nanotechnology has allowed the production of many things at a near zero cost, and yet there is still poverty in the world. And that makes me ask, why? And the game itself doesn't give you all the answers, but I think there's definitely a political motivation behind a lot of what's going on in this, just as there are political motivations behind poverty in our world. We could get rid of poverty if we chose. We don't choose to. There are reasons for this. They're very complex. And I think the game presents that to us very well. There are reasons that there is poverty in this setting. They're very complex. And then we have hero creation, interface 0, style, backgrounds, occupations, skills, and feats. Again, if you're familiar with the D20 mechanics, you will be familiar with these sections themselves. More information about the world itself, tools of the trade, equipment, weapons, cybernetics, bio upgrades, things like that. The meat and potatoes of a science fiction cyberpunk type setting. Systems of control, which is the new rules dealing with upgrades and equipment and things, and then we have subsections on the deep, which is how they refer to the net, because there's a whole ocean theme, which is we use it right now. You say you surf the net, so we use the terminology now. They've just kind of extrapolated a little further. I think they did a good job with extrapolating some of the memes that we have now into memes in the future, and they even give a definition for the word meme, which is kind of nice. Computer rules, how to create a somewhat functional artificial universe in the deep. You can have an avatar in this game. The avatar has stats, not the full stats of a character, but it still has statistics which show how robust it is, how good it is at interfacing with the digital world around it. So you can easily move the characters from the meat space to the digital space. And they do comment about the fact that a lot of citizens in the more advanced areas of the world are very much living in two spaces. They live out here in the meat space, but they live in the digital world just as much. That line has gotten very, very blurry for them. All right. Then we have more equipment upgrades for computers. Then we have narrating a series. And then the last section is allies, antagonists, and contacts, which is all very useful. Now, what is the world they're presenting? Well, the world they're presenting in this game is a world where China is the #1 power, where it has expanded its control, where it has both politically and physically, it's now has vassal states around it, essentially Korea, Cambodia, and basically all the nations that touch it to the south are now vassal states to it. They've taken over all of the Asian controlled regions that used to be part of Russia, so Russia is now a smaller country. They've taken over Taiwan. Japan is still separate, but they're now a shogunate, while China has returned the Mandarin structure into its political world. They're politically and financially and militarily the top dog on the block, which makes a lot of sense, because there have been many times in the past when China was the top dog, and I'm not going to be surprised if China gets much more powerful in our world in the near future. America has become balkanized in this setting, and I see that as well. There are large sections of what we could think of the United States that are still cohesive in this game, and they've become a theocracy, while the north and western states have branched off with Canada to create a new nation. The East Coast states have branched off with some of the maritime states in Canada to become their own nation. Parts of Texas is now on its own. So you see, it's a balkanized area, which unfortunately, because of our different cultural likes and dislikes in America, I don't really have a hard time believing. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I would not see it as a positive thing. Now, I would be alive in this setting up through a lot of it. Because, in theory, I could easily live until 2050, 2055. I might even hit 100 if I get lucky, so 2064 rather. So it's interesting to see that I would be living in a world where I would essentially have to leave my country without ever moving, because I could not live in a theocracy. I couldn't. And thankfully, the area of the United States that becomes a new nation where I live now is more open and more transhumanist than the more quote-unquote traditional theocratic sections of America, which still refer to themselves as the United States. But this is a really rich setting. There is so much here to look at. There is so much to really absorb and to enjoy. I could see, I mean, I'm reading this and ideas for campaign concepts and adventures are just flying through my head, and that is the sign of a good game. Now, since the mechanics are not ones I'm completely familiar with, I really wasn't making up new characters, which is another sign of a good game. If I'm not completely familiar with the mechanics, and this doesn't really get into the mechanics, so I can tinker with them in my head. So I didn't like project myself as a player into this world a whole lot. But as a GM, I'm looking at this as a rich and fertile environment for adventures. I could very much see using this in a D20 setting, or just ripping all of the setting information out and using it whole in whatever rule system you happen to like to run in a cyberpunk setting. Again, I'll be reading the True 20 rules in the near future, probably in the next month or so, hopefully. So I will have a better idea of how well that will function for a science fiction / cyberpunk setting. So maybe I can tell you in the future if I think that it would be a good fit for this setting. I'd be surprised if it isn't. I've seen D20 products in the past that did a good job at hitting that. Like, for example, Star Wars D20, I think, could have used quite handily to run this setting. So I definitely recommend looking at Interface Zero as a setting, even if you don't necessarily want to use the Modern 20 rules or the True 20 rules or any D20 system for the setting. I don't think you have to. You'll have to apologize. I have a cat next to me who apparently wants attention. I recommend this. I'm glad that I've had a chance to read it. And I look forward to new products coming from these people. Oh, and one side note, anyone know of a legally free map of the U.S. in the Interface Zero setting? I would really appreciate a link. Thank you.